y'all, my name is Viola, and I've been interviewing my dad about his 1997 Everest summit climb. He went on an expedition with Nova, and they actually filmed a documentary called Everest the Death Zone. He was with some pretty notable climbers like Ed Viesturs, David Rashears, Guy Cotter. Even though this was 30 years ago, I have some questions. I've never really talked to him about it, and I'm a naturally curious person, so I thought I would ask him some of my burning questions about Everest along with the internet's burning questions and share those with you guys. So I created this series, My Dad Climbed Everest and I Have Questions. I originally made it for TikTok, so that's why it's formatted the way it is. It's basically like compilations of those videos. So if you want to see them in their original form, I encourage you to check out my TikTok. Otherwise, stay tuned for these compilations. And in today's video, we're covering these topics. First, we're starting with the very, very common question of how you go poop on Mount Everest. He answers that in depth, so you'll have all your answers there. Then I asked him if he had to apply to climb Mount Everest, and then he answers a question of what the Hilary step on Everest is actually like. He tells us what the fixed lines on Everest were like in the 90s, and the different stages of an Everest climb and kind of the steps you have to take to work up to the summit. He tells us what kind of food he ate while on Everest, including what he ate at base camp all the way up to the high camps. Then he goes on to tell us how climbers pass time while they're at base camp because you spend a lot of time there. And then I asked him if he believes in the Yeti on Everest. So enjoy.
The question I get asked the most is, how do you go to the bathroom in the mountains? Well, it's pretty simple. It's just like you go to the bathroom now. You find some place to go pee, which I pee all the time. Or if you gotta go number two, which takes a lot more energy and you gotta be safe about it. At base camp, we had a barrel that we'd poop in, and then that barrel would get carried down, lower down the mountain and disposed of in a pit. They'd bury it. But on the upper mountain, a lot of times we would just poop in a crevasse back then, and let it go down into the crevasse, or we dig a big hole and make a kind of a latrine to poop in. And you always had to be very efficient at altitude when you're pooping. It's not like you can linger and sit on anything. You just kind of squat and go, and that takes a lot of energy. And I always hated pooping up on the mountain. It was no fun. And you had to make sure you're clean. You had to make sure your down suit was in a safe place so you didn't poop on yourself. So there's an art to it. And the key is not to make a mistake. There was really no application process for both climbs. I sent in a resume for both. Like at the 97 climb, when I talked to adventure consultants, they knew my background, climbing on Denali and all that stuff, and my past climb in 1991 on Everest. So they kind of knew. Nowadays you do have to send a resume in, depending on the quality of the guide service. And adventure consultants is one of the best. They won't allow somebody on those climbs that doesn't have a decent resume, or that wouldn't be a good fit for those climbs. They weed people out. They're not going to let anybody, just some guy that wakes up a couple of months ago and said, hey, I want to go climb Everest. They're not going to let those people on. Those kind of people do. There are some dubious guide services up there. I'm not going to name any names. You gotta be very careful who you go up there with and tie on to a rope with. And there are some people that are going up there for pure ego, and they don't have the experience. I think those are few and far between. I think most people up on that mountain are pretty decent climbers and have a decent climbing background. So the Hilary step, there is a Hilary step before April 2015 and after April 2015. In April of 2015, there was a massive earthquake in Nepal, and I was there. It was a 7.8 earthquake, and part of the Hilary step basically peeled off the mountain. It disappeared. And so now it's kind of like, from the pictures I've seen, and I really haven't studied it, it looks like it's more of a snow climb, ice climb, than it was when I was there in 1997. When I went up it, it was like a chimney. It was about, I would say 4 feet wide, and rock, like a U, and there was a fixed rope on it, And so I could grab the rope, and I had crampons on. I had gloved, heavy duty gloves, and I was able to kind of climb up with my Jumar, and also with my hands and my crampons, and jimmy my way up. It's about 25 to 30 feet, and I got on top of the Hilary step. I don't think it took me that long, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to climb it. And I got on top of that thing, and my stomach, I just kind of rolled onto the snowfield on top. And I remember trying to catch my breath. I was maxed out for that little section there. And it took me about 5 minutes to get my heart rate down, my breath down, where I could climb the final few hundred feet to the summit from the Hilary Step. Bottom line is, it's steep. It was steep, and it's intimidating, and you don't want to make any mistakes at all in the Hilary Step. Okay, there's fixed line up and down the mountain now, all the way to the summit. We had fixed line going through the ice fall and on the Lhotse face. Multiple Sherpa crews from different expeditions were responsible for different sections of the mountain for fixing the line. And I think the lines were fairly safe when I was there in '97. They weren't. We didn't have those crowds like you have now with all these people, and most of these people now have their Jumar into the line, and so you got all these people with these loads on these lines. So it does concern me, but I wasn't really that concerned in '97. But I would also tell you, I didn't load the rope. I put my Jumar on it, and I hardly ever put my full weight on that Jumar, which was on that fixed line. But I also always would look at the anchors to make sure they were okay. They were either ice screws or snow pickets, and I'd always check them out to make sure they were in. And if they were a little loose, I'd screw it in further. So little things like that, because the sun would heat up a snow picket or an ice screw, and that heat would get absorbed into the metal, and it would melt the snow and ice around those. So you always have to readjust those anchors throughout the climb. And that's important, and we did that quite a bit. It's a symphony. It's a slow process. It's detailed and organized. Timeline or stages of the expedition. You've got your approach, a trek into base camp, which is very important because you want to make sure you stay healthy, but you don't go too fast where you get sick and your acclimation is all screwed up. So you fly into Lukla, and then that's where the trek begins. It takes about 8 days to get to base camp. 7 to 8 days. You go slowly. You have some rest days. You allow your body to acclimate. You kind of get used to the rhythm of the mountain, and you get used to your teammates. And you get to base camp, and from a base camp is when you start going up and down the mountain. Base camp's at 17,300 feet. You get the first, the Khumbu ice fall is right above that, so you make sure the rope, it's all fixed line going up to Camp 1, which is at 19,500 feet maybe. So you start climbing from base camp to Camp 1 with gear and drop it off at Camp 1 and go back down the next, that same day. And you do that 3 or 4 times. Your body gets acclimated enough. Then maybe about a week later or so, or a little bit more than a week, you go up to Camp 1 and spend the night. A couple of nights there. Then you might go from Camp 1 and carry a load to Camp 2, which is called Advanced Base Camp, 21,500 feet, and drop loads there, come back down to Camp 1, spend the night, and then start going back and forth a little bit. And then you might spend the night at Camp 2, and then you come all the way back down to base camp and rest for 3 or 4 or 5 days, recover. And then for somebody like me, I'd climb from base camp to Camp 1, spend the night, Camp 1 to Camp 2, and then we'd establish Camp 2 as what we would call Advanced Base Camp. And I'd spend a lot of time at Camp 2 acclimating, and then we'd start slowly climbing up the Lhotse face to Camp 3 at 23,000 feet. You might go up there with one load, come back down, and wait a few days at Advanced Base Camp, and then go up, spend the night at Camp 3, acclimate, on oxygen probably, like 1 or 2 nights. You might climb up a little bit like I did to the top of the yellow band at 24,500 feet, and then go all the way back down to base camp and rest for 3 or 4 days, a week, kind of wait for good weather. And at that point, you've been on the mountain for 6 weeks. You just kind of look for the weather, and if you got a good weather window, you go up for the summit attempt, which you start at base camp, you go to camp 2, spend a few nights there, camp 2 to camp 3, spend 1 night there, camp 3 to camp 4 at 8,000 meters, look at the weather again, and then get up early in the morning and go for it.
So eating at altitude, especially on a mountain like Denali or Everest, for me it's always been hard. I always lose my appetite in the mountains at altitude, usually above 17,000 feet. It's hard for me to eat, so I have to mentally prepare myself to eat, to force the food down. But the food on Everest is pretty decent, especially at base camp. We have a cook tent and we have full-time cooks there, and they'll make omelets, potato pancakes, they'll make cakes. They made pizza multiple times when we were there in '97. You also have canned goods like green beans, and you'll have canned fruit up there, and every once in a while there'll be a helicopter that will fly in some oranges or apples or bananas, which are nice, just great to eat. In '97 we also had yogurt at base camp. We made our own yogurt every day, and we'd always have that at breakfast, and I'd mix it in with I put it on top of bread or some sort of granola mixture. It was great. But we ate pretty decent at base camp. But the higher you go up in the mountain, one, it's harder to eat because your appetite is less and you're nauseated a lot from the altitude. So we'd eat a lot of soups, a lot of ramen, mac and cheese, boil and bag stuff that you'd boil it and it'd be like a meat product or something weird. But we'd also eat a lot of dehydrated mountain house food, stuff like that. As you go up in altitude, your diet gets down, but you're burning a lot of calories, and you start to really, the weight just starts to melt off you, and it's hard to maintain weight. The other thing I'd eat a lot would be sausages, slices of sausage and cheese and nuts, things like that. But man, it was hard to eat. I hated it. And it was really hard to force the food down at Camp 3 and Camp 4 for me. Do I believe in the Yeti? It's entertaining, I'll tell you that. But no, I do not believe in the Yeti. I do not believe in Bigfoot. People that see the Yeti or the Bigfoot are probably under a lot of stress or drinking a lot of alcohol. I know at one of the monasteries on the way into Everest Base Camp, you can stop in and look at a Yeti skull, but from what I read on a CNN report, the DNA of the Yeti skull is a yak, some part of a yak, so it's not the Yeti. Yeah, there's been numerous people, Sherpas say they've seen the Yeti at night up in the mountain, and there's pictures of the tracks of Yeti, but hey, with all these people that live on Earth today, and they haven't found a Bigfoot or a Yeti, I just don't believe it. I think even the Sherpas just kind of joke about it. They know deep down that I think the Yeti doesn't exist. There are some black bears up in the Himalayas in certain areas of Nepal. Maybe they saw a bear, or maybe they saw some big dude wearing a monkey outfit. I don't know. There's snow leopards up there, and I've never seen a snow leopard, but I know some guys that have. And they live up in the high Himalayas, and they're really hard to spot, and they stay away from people. But that's what I'd want to see more than anything.